Mira didn't know that the man whose boots she polished every morning was the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She didn't know that he had been searching 7 kingdoms for the mate the moon goddess promised him in dreams. And she certainly didn't know that the moment she touched his hand, everything in both their worlds would shatter and rebuild itself around that single point of contact. She knelt in the servants' quarters before dawn, as she had every day for the past 3 months, working saddle soap into leather that cost more than most wolves saw in a lifetime. Her calloused fingers moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory born from necessity rather than skill. The borrowed servant's dress hung loose on her thin frame, grey wool that had seen better years on better women. Everything about her spoke of temporary, borrowed clothes, borrowed space, borrowed time in a world that had made it clear she didn't belong. 25 years old and mateless. The shame of it still burned in her chest like swallowed coals. Her former pack had whispered the word defective behind cupped hands, their eyes sliding away from her face as if her failure might be contagious. The pack alpha had been kinder than most when he'd finally asked her to leave. Find your path elsewhere, Mira. Perhaps the moon goddess has different plans for you. Different plans. She'd clung to those words during the weeks of walking, the nights of sleeping rough, the slow starvation that had driven her to beg for work in the great manor's kitchens. The boots gleamed now, black leather reflecting the weak pre-dawn light filtering through the narrow window. She lifted them carefully, knowing that whoever wore them commanded more power in his smallest finger than she'd ever held in her entire body. The head housekeeper had warned her on the first day. These boots belonged to someone important, someone whose displeasure could see her cast out onto the roads again. Mira had nodded and promised perfection, because perfection was all she had left to offer. She carried the boots through corridors that still felt too grand for her feet, past tapestries that told stories of wolves and power and bonds that lasted lifetimes. The great hall was already bustling with preparations for the morning feast, servants moving with the fluid choreography of people who knew their place in the world. Mira envied them that certainty. She'd almost reached the serving pantry when disaster struck in the form of Lord Garrett's youngest son, stumbling drunk from whatever revelry had kept him up all night. He cannoned into her shoulder, sending her sprawling across the stone floor. The boots flew from her hands, skittering across the polished stones toward the raised dais where the high table sat. "Clumsy bitch," the young lord slurred, not bothering to look back as he continued his unsteady progress toward his chambers. Mira scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The boots! Oh, gods, the boots! She could see them lying near the great chair at the centre of the high table, and she knew with sick certainty that she'd be blamed for their placement, blamed for the young lord's carelessness, blamed for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. She hurried to retrieve them, her bare feet silent on the cold stones. The great hall was empty of nobles this early, only servants setting trenchers and filling goblets for the morning meal. She thought she was alone as she knelt to gather the precious leather, relieved to find no scuffs or damage from their journey across the floor. "Those are mine." The voice came from directly behind her, low and rough like stone grinding against stone. Mira's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd been so focused on the boots that she hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't caught the scent of cedar and winter storms that should have announced his presence. She turned slowly, still on her knees, and found herself looking up into the face of the most devastatingly beautiful man she'd ever seen. Dark hair fell across his forehead in waves that caught the morning light, and his eyes were the pale gold of autumn leaves, framed by dark lashes that should have been illegal on someone so masculine. His jaw was carved from granite, his mouth full and severe, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. But it was the power that rolled off him in waves that made her stomach clench with recognition. Alpha. Not just any alpha, but something far beyond what she'd ever encountered. The air around him practically hummed with authority, with the kind of strength that could level mountains or raise kingdoms. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lord Garrett's son, he—" "Stand up." The command wasn't cruel, but it was absolute. Mira rose on shaking legs, the boots clutched against her chest like armour. She kept her eyes lowered, staring at the polished silver buckles on his belt, rather than meeting that golden gaze directly. "Look at me." Something in her chest pulled tight, a sensation she'd never felt before, as if invisible threads were drawing her upward. Against every instinct of submission she'd learned, she lifted her eyes to meet his. The world stopped. It wasn't metaphorical or poetic. Time actually ceased its forward motion, hanging suspended in the space between heartbeats. The golden thread she'd heard other wolves describe, the one that connected true mates across any distance, blazed to life between them like a live wire. She felt it snap into place with an almost audible click, joining her soul to his with bonds that felt older than mountains, stronger than death. His nostrils flared, and she watched his pupils dilate as her scent hit him. Pine and rain and something uniquely hers that she'd never noticed before, but which now seemed to fill the entire hall. His hands clenched at his sides, and she could see the way his jaw tightened as he fought for control. "Impossible!" he breathed, and she felt the word like a physical touch against her skin. She should speak, should explain about the boots, about the collision with Lord Garrett's son, about how she meant no disrespect. Instead, she stood frozen in the golden light of recognition, watching as the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories stared at her as if she were a miracle he'd stopped believing in. The boots slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that echoed through the sudden silence. Neither of them moved to retrieve them. "What's your name?" His voice was softer now, but no less commanding. When she didn't immediately answer, he took a single step closer, and the scent of him, cedar and winter storms and something dark and wild, wrapped around her like a living thing. "Mira," she managed, her tongue feeling thick and clumsy in her mouth. "My name is Mira." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went deeper than physical attraction or even the mate bond. He looked at her as if he'd been searching for her specifically, as if her face had been the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. "Mira," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his voice, precious and weighted with meaning she didn't understand. "I've been looking for you." Mira fled. The moment those golden eyes released her from their spell, she turned and ran through the corridors like a woman pursued by demons. Her bare feet slapped against the cold stones as she navigated the maze of servant passages, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would burst from her chest. Behind her, she heard him call her name once, the sound echoing off the walls like thunder, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. In the safety of the kitchen's shadows, she pressed herself against the rough stone wall and tried to convince herself that what had happened in the great hall was a mistake, a moment of madness brought on by too little food and too much stress. Alphas like him, gods, she didn't even know his name, didn't know anything except the devastating weight of his presence, didn't mate with broken wolves like her. The moon goddess had a sense of humour, but she wasn't cruel enough to create bonds that could never be fulfilled. She managed to avoid him for exactly 6 hours. Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills when she finally crept back to the kitchens, hoping to steal a few hours of work before the great manor fully awakened. She needed the routine, needed the mindless tasks that would keep her hands busy and her thoughts away from golden eyes and impossible recognition. But when she pushed open the heavy wooden door, he was there, sitting at the scarred prep table as if he belonged in the servants' domain. "Hello, Mira." His voice was gentler than it had been in the hall, but no less commanding. He wore simple clothes, dark wool and leather that spoke of wealth without ostentation, but they did nothing to diminish the raw power that seemed to radiate from his very skin. She froze in the doorway, every instinct screaming at her to run again. "My lord, I—" "Not lord." He stood slowly, his movements fluid and predatory despite their careful control. "My name is Kieran, and we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about." The words came out sharper than she intended, desperation making her brave. "What happened in the hall was a mistake. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm a mateless reject who polishes boots for a living." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Don't!" The single word cracked through the air like a whip. "Don't you ever call yourself nothing again?" The authority in his voice made her knees weak, but she forced herself to stand straighter. "It's what I am. Ask anyone. Ask the pack that threw me out for being defective." He was moving closer now, each step deliberate and measured. She could smell him again, that intoxicating blend of cedar and winter storms that made her mouth water and her skin flush with unwanted heat. "I felt it too," he said quietly. "The moment you looked at me, I felt the bond snap into place. You're my mate, Mira. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes." The moon goddess forgot about me a long time ago. But even as she said it, she could feel the lie in her bones. The golden thread between them hummed with life, growing stronger with each word he spoke. No. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of amber in his pale gold eyes. "She was saving you for me." Before she could protest again, before she could build more walls between them, he did something that shattered every defense she'd constructed. He knelt. This powerful alpha, this man who commanded respect from everyone in the great manor, lowered himself to one knee in the servants' kitchen and looked up at her with something that might have been reverence. "I've searched 7 kingdoms for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. 7 kingdoms and 1,000 dreams where your face was always just out of reach. I would have searched 1,000 more. Tears she refused to shed burned behind her eyes. "You don't understand. I'm broken. I'm 25 and mateless, cast out by my own pack. What could someone like you possibly want with someone like me?" "Everything." The word fell between them like a stone in still water. "I want everything you are, everything you've been, everything you'll become. Your strength, your courage, your stubborn refusal to let the world break you completely." "I'm not strong. You survived." He rose to his feet, but made no move to touch her, though she could see the restraint it cost him. "You were thrown away by fools who couldn't see your worth, and you survived. You walked roads alone, found work with your hands, kept going when lesser wolves would have given up. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." She wanted to believe him. Gods help her. She wanted to believe every word that fell from his perfect mouth. But years of rejection had taught her to be cautious, to expect disappointment rather than hope for miracles. "Even if that's true," she said carefully, "even if we are what you say we are, and it doesn't matter. Look at me. Look at this place. I don't belong in your world." "Then I'll make a place for you." The certainty in his voice was absolute. "Starting now, you're no longer polishing boots or scrubbing floors. You're going to be my personal attendant." "What?" The word came out as a squeak. "My personal attendant," he repeated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You'll tend to my chambers, my meals, my clothing. You'll stay close to me while we figure this out." She stared at him in horror. "The other servants will think—" "I don't care what they think." The edge of command crept back into his voice. "I care about keeping you safe and close while we navigate this bond." "Safe?" She laughed, the sound bitter in the morning air. "Safe from what?" His expression darkened, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the predator that lived beneath his careful control. "There are wolves in this world who would use you to get to me once they understand what you mean to me. There are politics and alliances and old grudges that could put you in danger simply because you exist." The words sent a chill down her spine. She'd been so focused on her own unworthiness that she hadn't considered the broader implications of being claimed by someone powerful. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his words changed everything. "I'm not just an alpha, Mira. I'm the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. Every wolf pack from here to the ice fields acknowledges my authority. Every alpha bows when I enter a room. Every decision I make affects thousands of lives." The breath left her lungs in a rush. Alpha King. Not just powerful, but the most powerful wolf in the known world. And he was claiming that she, rejected, broken, worthless she, was his mate. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yes." His mouth curved in the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. Completely insane and absolutely perfect. Before she could respond, the kitchen door burst open and the head cook bustled in, arms full of supplies for the morning meal. She stopped short when she saw them, her eyes going wide as she took in the scene. "Your Majesty," she stammered, dropping into a deep curtsy that sent vegetables rolling across the floor. "I didn't know. That is, we weren't expecting—" "It's fine, Martha." Kieran's voice was gentle but final. "From now on, Mira will be serving as my personal attendant. Please see that her quarters are moved to the east wing." Martha's mouth fell open as she looked between them, clearly trying to process the earth-shifting change in Mira's status. "Of course, Your Majesty. Right away." As the cook scurried away, muttering under her breath about sudden changes and impossible situations, Kieran turned back to Mira. The intensity in his gaze made her knees weak all over again. "This is really happening," she said, more to herself than to him. "Yes." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "And Mira, no one, not your former pack, not the servants here, not anyone, gets to make you feel small again. You're under my protection now, mine to guard, mine to cherish, mine to defend." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her veins like liquid fire. For the first time in her life, someone was claiming her. Someone was saying she belonged. "I don't know how to be anyone's anything," she admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The simple touch sent electricity racing along her skin. "But know this, Mira of no pack, mateless no more, you are mine now, and I protect what's mine." 3 days of living in the East Wing taught Mira that proximity to an Alpha King was both heaven and hell, wrapped in silk and starlight. Her new quarters were a revelation. Soft carpets beneath her feet, a bed large enough for 3 people, windows that looked out over gardens instead of kitchen yards. But it was the knowledge that Kieran slept just down the hall that kept her awake each night, her skin burning with awareness of his nearness. The mate bond had grown stronger with each passing hour, until she could feel his emotions like shadows at the edge of her consciousness. She was arranging fresh linens in his chambers when the world tilted sideways. "So this is the little bitch who thinks she can be our Lunar Queen." The voice came from behind her, cold and familiar in the worst possible way. Mira's hands stilled on the pillowcase as ice flooded her veins. She turned slowly to find Alpha Marcus standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 of his betas. Her former pack leader looked exactly as she remembered, tall and broad, with prematurely grey hair and eyes like winter frost. But now she could see the cruelty that had always lurked beneath his surface charm. "Alpha Marcus!" She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up a mess." He stepped into the room without invitation, his gaze sweeping over the fine furnishings with obvious distaste. "Did you really think you could run away and play pretend with the Alpha King? Did you think no one would notice when a defective little nobody suddenly started putting on airs?" Heat flashed through her, anger replacing fear for the first time in years. "I'm not putting on airs. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Where you're supposed to be is face down in a ditch somewhere, saving the rest of us from the embarrassment of your existence. 25 years old and mateless, Mira. Do you know what that makes you in the eyes of every pack in the Northern Territories?" "It makes her mine." Kieran's voice filled the doorway, like thunder before a storm. Mira had never been so relieved to hear anything in her life, but when she looked at him, her relief curdled into fear. His eyes had gone completely gold, the pale irises swallowed by the wolf that lived beneath his skin. Power rolled off him in waves so intense that the air itself seemed to shimmer. Marcus turned to face him, and Mira watched her former alpha's carefully constructed confidence crack at the edges. "Your Majesty, I was just collecting what belongs to my pack. Nothing in this room belongs to you." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, but Mira could hear the rage underneath. "In fact, I'm struggling to understand how you managed to get past my guards and into my private chambers without invitation." "I have evidence," Marcus said quickly, reaching into his coat. "Proof that this female is cursed, defective. She'll bring nothing but ruin to any alpha foolish enough to claim her." He pulled out a scroll, yellowed with age and sealed with black wax. "A prophecy from our pack's moon priestess, written the day she was born. It says she will be the downfall of any alpha who tries to mate her, that her wolf is broken, her bloodline tainted." Mira's world collapsed around her. She remembered that scroll, remembered the whispered conversations that had followed her throughout her childhood, the prophecy that had marked her as cursed from her very first breath. "You see?" Marcus continued, his confidence returning as he saw her reaction. "She knows it's true. She's always known. That's why she ran from our pack, because she understood what she was." Something inside Mira shattered. All the hope that had been building over the past 3 days, all the tentative belief that maybe she could have this beautiful, impossible thing, crumbled to ash. She looked at Kieran and saw him reading the scroll, his expression unreadable. "It's true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've always been cursed. I should have told you, but I hoped. I thought maybe—" "Enough." Kieran's voice cut through her spiralling thoughts like a blade, but he wasn't looking at her. His attention was fixed entirely on Marcus, and there was something in his expression that made the alpha take an involuntary step backward. "You come into my territory," Kieran said conversationally, "into my home, into my private chambers, and you threaten what is mine with lies and manipulation." "They're not lies," Marcus protested. "The prophecy is a fabrication." Kieran tore the scroll in half without even looking at it. "Written by a bitter old woman who wanted to control a pack's bloodline by convincing them their strongest potential Luna was worthless." Mira's head snapped up. "What?" "Did you never wonder," Kieran continued, his gaze still fixed on Marcus, "why a pack would keep a supposedly cursed child for 25 years? Why they would feed and house and tolerate someone who was truly worthless to them?" She hadn't wondered. She'd been too grateful to be allowed to exist, to question the logistics of her survival. "They kept you because your bloodline is anything but tainted," Kieran said, finally turning to look at her. "Your grandmother was Luna of the Eastern Mountain Pack. Your great-grandmother was a moon priestess whose power was legendary. You come from a line of strong Lunas, Mira, the kind of Lunas who could challenge an alpha's authority if they chose to." "That's impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" He moved closer, ignoring Marcus entirely now. "Haven't you always felt different? Haven't you always known you were meant for something more than servitude?" She had. Gods help her. She had always felt like she was sleepwalking through someone else's life, waiting for something she couldn't name to wake her up. "The prophecy was designed to keep you small," Kieran continued, "to convince you that your power was a curse so you would never learn to use it. But I can smell it on you, Mira. Lunar power, strong and pure, and waiting to be awakened." Marcus snarled, his control finally snapping. "Even if that's true, she's still mine. She belongs to my pack, and I'm taking her back to face judgment for abandoning her duties." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Kieran turned back to Marcus with the fluid grace of a predator who had just spotted prey. "You're welcome to try." What happened next moved too fast for Mira's human eyes to follow. One moment Marcus was standing near the door. The next he was pinned against the wall with Kieran's hand around his throat. The two betas moved to intervene and found themselves facing the business end of Kieran's extended claws. "Let me make something perfectly clear," Kieran said, his voice deadly quiet. "Mira is under my protection. She is my mate, my Luna, my queen. If you or anyone from your pack comes near her again, I will consider it an act of war." Marcus's face was turning purple, but he managed to wheeze out a response. You can't. She's nothing. She's everything." Kieran's grip tightened. "And if I hear that word applied to her again, I'll rip out your throat and use it to water my roses." He released Marcus so suddenly that the Alpha collapsed to the floor, gasping and clutching his bruised throat. "Get out of my territory, all of you, and spread the word. Anyone who harms a hair on her head answers to me personally." The 3 wolves scrambled for the door, Marcus shooting one last hateful look over his shoulder. "This isn't over," he rasped. "Yes," Kieran said calmly, "it is." When they were gone, silence filled the room like smoke. Mira stood frozen by the windows, her mind reeling from everything she'd learned. Lunar bloodline, Moon Priestess power, a fabricated prophecy designed to keep her weak. "Mira." Kieran's voice was gentle now, all the terrible authority set aside. "Look at me." She turned slowly, afraid of what she might see in his eyes. But there was no pity there, no disgust or disappointment, just the same fierce protectiveness that had driven him to throttle her former Alpha. "You really think I'm not cursed?" she whispered. "I know you're not cursed." He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. "You're blessed, Mira, blessed and powerful and absolutely perfect." The tears she'd been holding back for 3 days finally spilled over. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "When he showed you that scroll, I thought you would realize your mistake and send me away." "Never." The word was a vow, absolute and unbreakable. "You're mine, remember? I don't give up what's mine." Something warm unfurled in her chest, chasing away the last of the cold fear Marcus had brought into the room. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe, protected, wanted. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran's mouth curved in a smile that was equal parts tender and predatory. "Now we show the world exactly what kind of Luna they've been sleeping on, and we make sure no one ever underestimates you again." Word of Marcus's visit spread through the great manor like wildfire, and by evening the entire noble court had assembled in the great hall. Mira stood at Kieran's side on the raised dais, acutely aware of every whispered conversation, every speculative glance cast in her direction. The borrowed servant's dress had been replaced with deep blue silk that complemented her eyes, but no amount of fine clothing could quiet the voice in her head that insisted she didn't belong here. "You don't have to do this," Kieran murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "I can handle Marcus without putting you through a public spectacle." Mira straightened her shoulders, drawing on strength she hadn't known she possessed. "No, I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting other people define who I am. If he wants to challenge our bond publicly, then let's settle this publicly." Pride flickered in Kieran's golden eyes. "That's my Luna." The great doors opened with a resonant boom, and Marcus strode into the hall, flanked by a dozen wolves from his pack. He'd cleaned himself up since their encounter in Kieran's chambers, but Mira could still see the finger-shaped bruises on his throat. Good. Let everyone see what happened to those who threatened the Alpha King's mate. Marcus stopped in the centre of the hall and raised his voice to carry to every corner of the vast space. "I invoke the right of reclamation. This female belongs to my pack, and I demand her return to face judgment for abandoning her duties and bringing shame upon our bloodline." A ripple of murmurs swept through the assembled nobles. Mira felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her chin high. She would not cower, not any more. "Reclamation?" Kieran's voice cut through the whispers like a blade through silk. "You want to reclaim what you threw away like garbage? Interesting interpretation of leadership, Marcus." "She is a cursed anomaly," Marcus declared, pulling another scroll from his robes. I have testimony from 3 pack elders, all swearing that she has brought nothing but misfortune to any who showed her kindness. She is mateless at 25, barren as winter stone, worthless as— Enough. The single word cracked through the air like thunder. Kieran descended the steps of the dais with predatory grace, and Mira watched every alpha in the room instinctively lower their eyes in submission. You come into my hall, insult my mate, and expect me to simply hand over what is mine? Your arrogance would be amusing if it weren't so pathetic. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then I formally challenge your claim. Trial by combat, as is my right under the old laws. When I defeat you, she returns with me. And when I defeat you, Kieran said conversationally, you forfeit all rights to her forever. Your pack acknowledges her as Luna Queen, and you spend the rest of your miserable life knowing that the worthless anomaly you cast out is now the most powerful female in the Northern Territories. The hall erupted in excited whispers. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the 2 alphas circle each other like wolves preparing to fight. This was really happening. Kieran was going to fight for her, risk everything for a woman the world had convinced was worthless. Agreed, Marcus snarled, and when you're bleeding out on these stones, maybe you'll understand that some mistakes can't be undone with pretty dresses and wishful thinking. Kieran smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Mira had ever seen. The only mistake here is yours, Marcus. You had a treasure and treated her like trash. Now you get to watch while I claim what you were too blind to see. The combat circle formed quickly, nobles and servants alike pressing close to witness the spectacle. Mira remained on the dais, her knuckles white as she gripped the stone railing. She wanted to close her eyes, wanted to block out the violence about to unfold, but she forced herself to watch. If Kieran was willing to bleed for her, the least she could do was witness his courage. The first clash was brutal and swift. Marcus was a large alpha, powerfully built and experienced in combat, but Kieran moved like liquid death. He flowed around Marcus's attacks with inhuman grace, striking with surgical precision that left his opponent staggered and bleeding within minutes. "You're fighting for a broken female," Marcus panted, wiping blood from his split lip. "A defective runt who will never give you heirs, never strengthen your bloodline." "I'm fighting for my mate," Kieran replied calmly, circling his wounded opponent. "My Luna, my queen, the other half of my soul." Marcus lunged with desperate fury, claws extended, aiming for Kieran's throat. But Kieran was ready. He caught Marcus's wrist in an iron grip and twisted, the crack of breaking bone echoing through the sudden silence. Marcus screamed and dropped to his knees. "Yield!" Kieran commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Never!" Marcus spat blood onto the stone floor. "I'll die before I bow to a king who mates with garbage." "That can be arranged." Kieran's hand closed around Marcus's throat, lifting the smaller alpha off his feet with terrifying ease. For a moment, Mira thought he might actually kill the man. Part of her wanted him to. But then Kieran's gaze found hers across the circle, and she saw the question in his eyes. She shook her head slightly. Not death, not for her. She wouldn't have blood on her hands, even blood as tainted as Marcus's. Kieran nodded almost imperceptibly and loosened his grip just enough to let Marcus breathe. "You will publicly acknowledge Mira as Luna Queen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You will renounce all claims to her now and forever, and you will spread word throughout the territories that any who harm her will answer to me personally." Marcus's face was purple with rage and lack of oxygen, but he managed a strangled yes. "Say it properly." Kieran's grip tightened. "All of it." "I acknowledge Mira as Luna Queen," Marcus gasped. "I renounce all claims to her. Any who harm her will face the Alpha King's wrath." Kieran released him, and Marcus collapsed to the stones, coughing and clutching his throat. "Good. Now get out of my territory, all of you, and remember what you've learned here today." As Marcus's pack dragged their defeated Alpha from the hall, Kieran turned to face the assembled nobles. His clothes were torn and bloody, his hair dishevelled from the fight, but he radiated power like a force of nature. "Let there be no doubt," he declared, his voice ringing off the vaulted ceiling. "Mira is my chosen mate, my destined Luna, my queen in all but ceremony. Any who question her worthiness question me. Any who threaten her declare war on this kingdom." He climbed the steps back to the dais and took Mira's trembling hand in his. "She is mine," he said, looking out over the crowd of witnesses, "and I am hers. From this day forward she speaks with my voice and acts with my authority." The hall erupted in cheers and applause, but Mira barely heard them. She was lost in Kieran's golden eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd just done for her. He'd fought for her, won for her, claimed her before the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the celebration. "Because you're worth fighting for," he replied simply. "Because you're precious beyond measure, and it's time the world knew it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as he lifted their joined hands above their heads, presenting her to the crowd as his chosen queen. The servant girl who had polished boots at dawn was gone forever. In her place stood Luna Queen Mira, mate to the Alpha King, protected and cherished, and finally, home. "Long live the Luna Queen!" someone shouted from the crowd. The chant was taken up by dozens of voices, echoing through the hall like a prayer made manifest. "Long live the Luna Queen! Long live the Luna Queen!" Mira had never heard anything more beautiful in her life. 2 weeks later, Mira stood before the great mirror in what had once been the Alpha King's private chambers, and was now theirs, watching as her lady's maid fastened the intricate clasps of her coronation gown. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk and silver thread, cut to emphasize curves she hadn't even known she possessed. Around her throat lay the Luna Queen's ceremonial necklace, ancient sapphires that had adorned the throats of queens for 1,000 years. "You look like you were born to wear a crown," Kieran said from the doorway, his voice warm with affection and something deeper. He was already dressed in his ceremonial robes, black leather and silver mail, that made him look every inch the legendary Alpha King. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life," Mira admitted, smoothing her hands over the silk skirts. 3 weeks ago I was polishing boots. Now I'm about to be crowned queen of half the known world." "Not playing," Kieran corrected, crossing to stand behind her in the mirror. His hands settled on her shoulders, warm and steadying. "Living. This is your life now, Mira. Your crown, your throne, your kingdom to help me rule." She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his unwavering certainty. "What if I'm terrible at it? What if I make mistakes that hurt people?" "Then you'll learn from them, the same way every ruler before us has." His lips brushed the sensitive spot just below her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Besides, you won't be alone. We'll figure it out together." Together. The words still sent warmth spiralling through her chest. After a lifetime of solitude, the concept of partnership felt both miraculous and terrifying. The coronation ceremony was held in the great cathedral at the heart of the capital, its soaring spires reaching toward the heavens like fingers made of stone and prayer. Every seat was filled with nobles, pack leaders, and dignitaries from across the Northern Territories. Mira walked down the endless aisle on Kieran's arm, her heart hammering against her ribs as hundreds of eyes tracked her progress. The crown itself was ancient beyond measure, wrought from silver and set with moonstones that seemed to glow with inner fire. As the high priest lifted it above her head, Mira felt something shift deep within her chest. Power, dormant for 25 years, began to stir like a sleeping dragon opening its eyes. "Do you, Mira of no pack, accept the sacred duty of Luna Queen?" the priest intoned, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Will you protect the innocent, guide the lost and stand as beacon of strength for all who call you queen?" "I will," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. The crown settled onto her head with surprising weight, and suddenly the world exploded into sensation. She could feel every heartbeat in the cathedral, every breath drawn by the assembled witnesses. The mate bond with Kieran blazed like a star-going nova, but underneath it she sensed something else. Threads of connection spreading out like a vast web, linking her to every wolf in the kingdom. Lunar power, real, undeniable, impossibly strong. "Long live Queen Mira!" the priest declared, and the cathedral erupted in cheers that shook dust from the ancient stones. The weeks that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of lessons and ceremonies and quiet moments stolen between official duties. Mira learned to navigate court politics with the same determination that had kept her alive on the roads. She studied trade agreements and territorial disputes, absorbed centuries of royal protocol, and slowly began to understand the weight of the crown she wore. But it was the private moments that transformed her most profoundly. Evenings spent in their chambers, talking by candlelight about dreams and fears and the kingdom they would build together. Mornings when Kieran would bring her coffee and trace the mating mark that had finally appeared at the base of her throat, a silver crescent that proclaimed her claimed and cherished. Afternoons in the garden where he taught her to access the lunar power that flowed through her veins like liquid moonlight. "Feel it," he murmured one twilight evening as they sat beside the fountain. "The connections, every wolf in our territory is linked to you now." Mira closed her eyes and reached out with senses she was still learning to use. There, pack bonds stretching across miles, thin threads of connection that pulsed with life and loyalty and need. She could sense the elderly Alpha in the eastern mountains struggling with a border dispute. The young mother in the southern valleys worried about her sick cub, the lonely bachelor in the northern forests searching for his place in the world. "They need so much," she whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their hopes and fears. "Yes," Kieran agreed, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "And now you can help them. Not all at once, not perfectly, but better than they've ever been helped before." She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression of such tender pride that it stole her breath. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I know you," he said simply. "I see your heart, Mira, your capacity for compassion, your strength, your desperate need to make things better for everyone around you. You were born to be Lunar Queen. The moon goddess just had to teach you to believe it." 3 months into her reign, a delegation arrived from the eastern mountain pack, the same territory where her grandmother had once ruled as Luna. The elderly Alpha who led them was frail with age, his hands shaking as he knelt before her throne. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice cracked with emotion. "I served under your grandmother's rule. She was the finest Luna I ever knew. Wise and fierce and endlessly kind. I see her in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. The bloodline runs true." Tears pricked behind Mira's eyes as she rose from the throne and helped the old Alpha to his feet. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "Please, I never knew her stories." He smiled, and for a moment his aged features were lit with the memory of better days. She could calm a raging storm with a word, could sense a wolf's pain from miles away. But more than that, she made every person in our pack feel seen, feel valued, feel like they mattered. "That's all any of us really want, isn't it?" Mira murmured. "To matter, to belong." "Yes, Your Majesty, and under your rule I believe we all will." That night, as she lay curled against Kieran's chest in their massive bed, Mira finally spoke the words that had been building in her heart for months. "I'm not afraid any more," she whispered into the darkness. "Afraid of what?" His voice was drowsy, content. "Of being too much, or not enough, of failing everyone who depends on me." She tilted her head back to meet his eyes in the moonlight streaming through the windows. I'm not the broken girl who polished your boots anymore. I know who I am now. Who are you? He asked, though she could see he already knew the answer. I'm Queen Mira, she said, the words ringing with quiet certainty. Luna of the Northern Territories, your mate, your equal, your partner in all things. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. Kieran's smile was radiant in the silver light. Yes, you are, and I've never been prouder of anything in my life. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promises for all the tomorrows stretching out before them. Outside their windows, the kingdom slept peacefully under the protection of their Alpha King and Luna Queen. Inside their chambers, two souls who had found each other against all odds celebrated the miracle of belonging, of being chosen, of being exactly enough. 6 months had passed since the coronation, and Mira woke each morning in the arms of her mate with a sense of profound contentment she'd never thought possible. The autumn light streaming through their chamber windows painted everything in shades of gold and amber, matching the warm glow that seemed to radiate from within her these days. "Good morning, my queen," Kieran murmured against her temple, his voice rough with sleep and affection. "Good morning, my king," she replied, stretching languidly in the circle of his arms. The simple ritual of waking together had become sacred to her, this quiet moment before the demands of ruling claimed them both. His hand drifted to rest on her still flat stomach, and she felt his smile against her skin. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I could conquer the world," she said, which wasn't entirely hyperbole. The pregnancy had awakened something even more powerful within her lunar abilities, as if their child was already strengthening the bonds that connected her to their people. "Though I might settle for conquering breakfast first." Kieran laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest and into hers. "I'll have the kitchen prepare your usual, extra berries, no meat that smells too strongly." The thoughtfulness still amazed her sometimes. This powerful Alpha King who commanded armies and negotiated treaties remembered exactly how her morning sickness manifested and adjusted accordingly. It was in these small gestures that she saw the depth of his love most clearly. They made their way through the morning routine they'd perfected over months of practice, him bringing her coffee while she reviewed the day's correspondence, both of them discussing upcoming meetings and territorial concerns with the easy partnership of true equals. It was a far cry from the terrified servant girl who'd once hidden in kitchen corners, afraid to take up too much space in the world. "The delegation from the Southern Valleys arrives this afternoon," Kieran mentioned, scanning a report from his border guards. "They're having issues with rogue wolves attacking their supply lines." "I'll handle it," Mira said automatically, then paused as she realised what she'd done. 6 months ago, she would have asked permission to offer help. Now she simply offered it, secure in her authority and her ability to make a difference. "Together," Kieran corrected gently, the same way he always did when she forgot they were partners in this. "We'll handle it together." The correction still made her heart flutter with happiness. Together. Always together. After breakfast, they walked through the gardens where their love had first begun to bloom. The autumn flowers were in their final glory before winter claimed them, and Mira found herself stopping by the fountain where Kieran had first taught her to access her lunar power. "Remember when you brought me here that first time?" she asked, trailing her fingers in the cool water. "I was so afraid of what I might find inside myself. And now?" He settled beside her on the stone bench, his hand finding hers with the unconscious ease of long practice. "Now I know exactly who I am." She turned to face him fully, seeing her own contentment reflected in his golden eyes. "I'm the Luna Queen who rewrote the laws about rejected wolves, ensuring no one else goes through what I did. I'm the ruler who established the healing centres in every territory, so no pack member suffers alone. I'm your mate, your equal, the mother of your heir." "You're everything I never dared dream of," he said softly, lifting their joined hands to press a kiss to her knuckles. "And our people love you almost as much as I do." It was true. The transformation in the kingdom had been remarkable. Pack bonds stronger than they'd been in generations. Disputes resolved through compassion rather than force, a sense of hope and belonging that touched every corner of their territory. Mira had learned to wield her lunar power with precision and grace, healing old wounds and building new connections wherever she went. That afternoon they held court together, addressing the concerns of the Southern Valley delegation with the fluid coordination they'd developed over months of shared rule. Mira listened with her enhanced senses, feeling the fear and frustration of the petitioners, while Kieran provided the strategic thinking that would turn her insights into actionable solutions. "We'll send additional patrol units," he decided after hearing their report, "but more importantly, we'll establish a communication network using lunar bonds. Queen Mira can teach your pack's Luna to extend her influence over longer distances, creating an early warning system." The visiting Alpha's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, if you could do that, it would change everything for us." "That's what we're here for," Mira said warmly, "to change things for the better." As evening fell, they found themselves back in their private chambers, sharing a quiet dinner by candlelight. The baby had been active today, fluttering movements that still filled Mira with wonder. She was carrying the future of their bloodline, the next generation of rulers who would inherit both Kieran's strength and her compassion. "Do you ever miss it?" Kieran asked suddenly, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "The simplicity of your old life, before crowns and politics and the weight of a kingdom on your shoulders?" Mira considered the question seriously, thinking back to the frightened girl who'd once believed herself worthless. "Sometimes I miss the quiet," she said honestly, "but I don't miss feeling like I didn't matter. I don't miss believing I was broken or unwanted or destined for nothing but service to others." She reached across the small table to take his hand. "Besides, my life was never really simple. It was just empty. This life has purpose, meaning, love." "Love," he repeated as if tasting the word. Such a simple word for something so profound. "The most profound thing," she agreed. "Strong enough to transform a rejected servant into a queen. Strong enough to heal a kingdom. Strong enough to create new life." Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and Kieran's followed, covering hers with gentle reverence. "I have something to confess," he said quietly. "That first morning when you spilled wine on me, it wasn't an accident that I was there early." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I'd been having dreams about you for months. A face I couldn't quite see, a scent I couldn't identify, a voice calling to me across impossible distances. I started walking the halls at dawn, hoping to catch some trace of what was haunting my sleep." He smiled ruefully. "I was in that corridor specifically because something told me I needed to be there." "The mate bond," she breathed. "Even before we met, it was pulling us together." "Fate," he agreed, "though I prefer to think of it as the moon goddess having an excellent sense of timing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked across the table, watching the candles burn lower as the night deepened around them. Outside, their kingdom settled into peaceful sleep under the protection of rulers who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful from their union. "I love you," Mira said suddenly, the words carrying all the wonder and gratitude and fierce devotion that filled her heart to overflowing. "I love you too," Kieran replied, his voice rich with the same emotions. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows after that." As they prepared for bed, Mira caught sight of herself in the great mirror, the same one where she'd once doubted her worthiness to wear a crown. Now she saw a woman transformed, confident in her power, secure in her love, ready for whatever challenges the future might bring. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life the moon goddess had always intended for her. The rejected servant girl was gone forever, replaced by a queen who knew her worth and used it to lift up everyone around her. And in the morning she would wake up in the arms of her mate and begin another day of ruling the kingdom they'd built together, protected and cherished, and completely, perfectly home.